Welcome to Terrifying Exorcism. Tonight's case is not just another story. It's the terrifying case of a 14-year-old boy who faced something unexplainable, a battle against 29 spirits, and lived to tell about it. But before we dive deeper, I want to know, what time is it where you are right now, and from which part of the world are you watching this? Write it in the comments below, because as you hear this case, you might start to wonder, did those spirits really leave him? Or are some of them still waiting in silence? I will never forget the first time I heard his name. It was early in 2002, during one of my shifts at the regional hospital in St. Anselm, a small town tucked between cornfields and back roads in southern Illinois. A nurse, leaning over a pile of charts, whispered it as if repeating a rumor. "There's this boy," she said. "Something's wrong with him. No one knows what." At first, it was just another fragment of local gossip. Every town has a story. Someone's uncle who saw lights over the fields, a farmhouse where windows slam on their own, a child who screams in his sleep. But this one lingered. Maybe because I was new to St. Anselm, or maybe because I had already seen enough unexplained cases in emergency wards to know that behind every rumor lies something worth investigating. The boy's name was Michael Carter, 13 years old, only child of Sarah and Daniel Carter, a quiet couple who ran the hardware store on Main Street. I would later learn that they were known in town as polite, hard-working and private. Churchgoers, yes, but not zealots. Their son, Michael, had the reputation of being intelligent, reserved, sometimes too serious for his age. He read books most kids wouldn't touch, spent evenings helping his father fix things in the store, and was described by his teachers as bright but distant. The first signs were subtle. At least, that's what his mother told me years later when I interviewed her for the case file. He started to complain of fatigue, said he couldn't sleep. Teachers noticed him staring at nothing, lips moving, as if whispering to someone they couldn't see. At first, they assumed it was just adolescence, maybe stress, but then came the incidents no parent forgets. One evening in late October 2001, Michael walked into the kitchen and told his mother that there were people in the walls. He described them in detail, men and women whispering, some crying, others laughing too loudly. When Sarah insisted it was just his imagination, Michael grew pale and repeated, "They're here, they don't like you." The Carters did what any sensible family in St. Anselm would do. They took him to the doctor. Blood tests, neurological exams, even an MRI. Nothing abnormal. The doctors labeled it stress, perhaps the onset of depression or a dissociative episode. They suggested counseling. Sarah nodded, relieved to hear it was nothing serious. But Daniel, I'm told, didn't buy it. He insisted something was happening to his boy that medicine couldn't explain. The following weeks brought escalation. Michael's voice began to change, not constantly, but in sudden bursts, mid-sentence, as though someone else had seized control of his throat. Sarah described one night when she found him seated on the floor of his bedroom, rocking back and forth, muttering in a low, gravelly voice she swore did not belong to him. When she asked what he was saying, Michael lifted his head and answered, "They're teaching me their names." That detail stuck with me, the idea of names. Because in the world of possession cases, names have meaning. They are not random. They are an assertion of presence. By Christmas of that year, the family's life had unraveled. Michael's mood swung violently. He scratched at his arms until they bled, claiming they wanted to mark him. At school, he lashed out at classmates without provocation, eyes glazed, fists swinging. The school counselor called it behavioral disturbance and recommended medication. But Daniel refused. He told Sarah, in words she later repeated to me with a tremor in her voice, "This isn't a sickness. This is a fight for his soul." The town began to whisper. Small communities noticed things quickly. Parishioners at St. Anselm's Catholic Church reported hearing Michael muttering during Mass, not prayers but phrases in what sounded like another language. One woman swore she heard him repeat the same guttural line 3 times in a row. Non sumus pauci. We are not few. I didn't encounter Michael directly until March 2002. I had been assigned as a junior psychiatrist at the hospital, and one of my colleagues asked me to sit in on an evaluation. The Carters had finally agreed to seek psychiatric consultation after an especially violent episode at home. Michael had woken in the middle of the night and smashed every mirror in the house with a hammer. When questioned, he simply said, "They told me to." He entered my office quietly, a pale boy with dark circles under his eyes. His hands shook. His voice at first was steady, polite even, but then without warning it shifted, not higher or lower exactly, but hollow, as though it resonated from somewhere behind him. "You don't want to know us," he said, eyes fixed on mine. "There are many." I remember every hair on my arm rising. I tried to remain clinical, asking routine questions about hallucinations, stress, family. Michael barely responded. Then, just as suddenly, he returned to his normal voice, blinked, and whispered, "I don't want to be here." I documented it as dissociative identity disorder with possible psychotic features. But privately, I wasn't convinced. There was no history of trauma, no sign of drug use. His episodes carried a consistency that didn't match textbook psychosis. And most disturbingly, he seemed aware afterward of things he should not have known. Personal details about me, about colleagues, about patients he had never met. When I closed my notes that night, I wrote one sentence I have never forgotten. "If this is psychological, it is unlike anything I've seen. If it is not psychological, then what are we facing?" That was the beginning. None of us could have predicted how far it would go. By summer, Michael Carter would no longer be the boy his parents knew. By the end of the ordeal, there would be talk not of one presence but of 29. And only one question would remain: how did he survive? I left that first session with Michael shaken, but still bound by protocol. The hospital required a follow-up, so I scheduled another evaluation the following week. I told myself that I would stay grounded in psychiatry, that I would not allow superstition to influence my judgment. Yet a part of me could not ignore the look in his eyes when he whispered about the many. It was not the vacant stare of a delusional child. It was purposeful. The second session took place in early April 2002. Michael arrived with his mother, Sarah, who clutched her handbag as if holding herself together. He was thinner, his skin dull, lips chapped. When I greeted him, he did not respond immediately. Instead, he pressed both hands flat against the wall of my office and whispered, "They don't like this place." I noted the behavior calmly, masking my unease. I began the session with questions about school, sleep, appetite. He answered in short, clipped phrases. Then his gaze shifted upward to the ceiling, as if following something invisible. His mouth opened slightly. The voice that came out was deeper than before. "She belongs to us." Sarah gasped. "Michael, don't say that." I intervened, telling her we needed to stay calm, that such utterances could be symptomatic of dissociation. But Michael turned to me and said, "You know what we are." At that moment I realized we had left the realm of ordinary clinical disturbance. Still, my training demanded that I test him for consistency. I asked, "Who are you?" He smiled, faintly. "Not one. Never one." When the session ended, Sarah broke down in my office. She told me that her husband Daniel had begun sleeping in Michael's room at night, out of fear their son might harm himself. Objects were missing from the house, knives, heavy tools, only to be found later in Michael's closet. He denied hiding them. "They wanted them," he explained flatly. I recommended immediate inpatient observation. Sarah hesitated, but Daniel, when I reached him by phone, refused outright. He didn't trust hospitals, didn't trust doctors. "You'll label him," he said, "but you won't help him. What's happening to my boy isn't something you can medicate away." Against my better judgment, Michael returned home. The reports I received over the next month painted a picture of rapid decline. Teachers said he stopped speaking in class altogether. At home, he ate little, often staring at corners of rooms for hours. Sarah once found him kneeling by the back door, pressing his ear to the wood as though listening to voices outside. When she tried to move him, he shoved her back with startling force. Then came the incident that shook the town. On May 17th, during Mass at St. Anselm's, Michael let out a scream so loud that parishioners swore it rattled the pews. He collapsed to the floor, convulsing, while shouting words in what several witnesses later described as Latin or something like it. The priest, Father Thomas Keene, rushed to him, attempting to calm him, but Michael clawed at the man's cassock, shrieking, "You can't stop us!" The congregation panicked. Some tried to restrain him. Others whispered that it was a seizure. But when the fit ended, Michael rose calmly to his feet and walked out of the church, silent, as though nothing had happened. By that evening, the Carters' phone did not stop ringing. Neighbors, friends, even strangers were calling, offering opinions: epilepsy, schizophrenia, demonic influence. Sarah later told me that was the night she began to truly fracture. She wanted answers from medicine, but the church community pressed otherwise. "If it is spiritual," one woman warned her, "delays are dangerous." The hospital finally convinced Daniel to bring Michael back after another violent episode at home. I was present when he arrived at the ward on May 24th. He had scratches across his forearms and dried blood at the corner of his mouth. He refused to sit, instead pacing the room in tight, restless circles. I asked him what had happened. He stopped, looked directly at me and said, "They wake me at night. They stand by the bed. They tell me what's coming." I asked what was coming. He tilted his head. More. The psychiatric team prescribed antipsychotic medication. For a brief time, 2 days, there seemed to be improvement. He was quieter, less restless, though drowsy from the sedatives. But then, in the middle of the 3rd night, nurses found him sitting upright in bed, eyes wide open, speaking in a guttural cadence. The transcript of their report reads, "Unintelligible language, repeated phrases, appeared unresponsive to staff." When I interviewed him afterward, he claimed no memory of the event, but he added something chilling. "They said medicine doesn't matter. They'll wait it out." The pressure on the Carters grew unbearable. Daniel insisted the hospital was wasting time. He sought out Father Keene, who visited Michael privately. The priest would not share details with me, but Sarah later revealed that after that meeting, Keene looked deeply unsettled. He told them he needed to consult with the diocese. That hesitation angered Daniel. He wanted immediate action. But in the Catholic Church, exorcisms are not granted lightly. They require investigation, proof, and approval from higher authority. Too many cases had been dismissed as psychiatric. Too many priests had been accused of superstition. Meanwhile, Michael's condition worsened. He stopped eating altogether, surviving only on water. He refused to let his mother touch him, recoiling as though her hand burned. He told his father, "They don't want you in this house anymore." On June 2nd, during another evaluation, I pressed him about the voices. He suddenly leaned close, so close I could smell the iron tang of blood on his breath. "You can't help him," he said, but the voice was not his. "You will watch him fall." Then, just as suddenly, Michael blinked, pulled back, and began to sob. For the first time since I met him, he seemed like a child again, terrified, begging us not to leave him alone. That night, I wrote in my notes, "If possession is a word we dismiss too quickly, we may be blind to something we cannot yet explain." By the end of that week, the Carters received word from the diocese. Father Keene was granted permission to begin preliminary rites, not a full exorcism, but prayers of deliverance. It was a small step, one that acknowledged the possibility of spiritual affliction without fully declaring it. For the Carters, it was hope. For me, it marked the line where medicine and faith collided, neither willing to surrender, both desperate for answers. Michael was brought home under close supervision. On the evening of June 8th, as his parents prepared for Father Keene's first prayer session, Sarah found a note scrawled on the wall of Michael's bedroom in black marker. It read simply, 29. She asked Michael what it meant. He didn't answer. He only stared at her with hollow eyes and whispered, "They're almost all here." The number lingered like a curse in that house. Sarah told me later she tried to scrub it from the bedroom wall. No matter how much she scrubbed, the faint black outline of 29 remained, like a shadow pressed into the plaster. Daniel refused to let her cover it with paint. "If it means something," he said grimly, "we need to know what." Michael never admitted to writing it. When asked, he shook his head violently and insisted, "It wasn't me. They wanted it there." On June 10th, Father Thomas Keane arrived at the Carter home with a small leather-bound book of prayers and a vial of holy water. He wasn't the kind of priest one imagines in horror stories. He was 52, balding, soft-spoken and hesitant in his words. He had served St. Anselm's parish for nearly 20 years, mostly baptisms, weddings, funerals. He had never performed even a minor rite of exorcism before. I was there that evening, as an observer. Daniel insisted on it. He wanted someone scientific to witness, in his words, what medicine refuses to face. I agreed reluctantly, still telling myself I would document and rationalize. The session began in the living room. The lights were dimmed. Michael sat in an armchair, knees tucked up, face expressionless. His mother sat close, clutching rosary beads. Father Keane opened with the sign of the cross and a prayer for protection. His voice trembled slightly, though he tried to hide it. At first, Michael remained silent, but as the prayers continued, he began to shift in his seat, twitching his hands, tapping his feet against the carpet in restless patterns. When Keane sprinkled holy water, Michael flinched as though burned. His eyes flew open, wide and glassy. He didn't scream, only hissed, low and animal-like, lips curling back to show his teeth. Sarah sobbed, whispering, "Oh God, it's real." Keane pressed on, reciting prayers of deliverance, asking for peace in the household. At one point, he placed his hand lightly on Michael's forehead. Michael's entire body stiffened. In a guttural tone that shook the room, he muttered, "You are weak." Keane drew back, visibly rattled. Daniel urged him to continue, but the priest stopped after less than 20 minutes. He insisted this was only the beginning, that what he had permission for were prayers of deliverance, not a full exorcism. "We must wait for the bishop's decision," he said quietly, avoiding Daniel's angry stare. That night, Michael refused to sleep in his room. He insisted they were gathering there. Daniel forced him into bed anyway, but at 2 a.m, Sarah woke to the sound of violent banging. They found Michael crouched in the corner of his room, head butting the wall repeatedly until his forehead bled. When Daniel pulled him back, Michael screamed in that same hollow voice, "We are 29. I returned to the Carter home the following day with a tape recorder, determined to gather evidence. Michael was withdrawn, refusing to look at me. I asked him directly about the number. For a long time he was silent. Then, in barely a whisper, he said, "They're lining up." "What do you mean?" I pressed. His eyes flicked to mine, and for the briefest moment, I felt something cold ripple through me. "They want me hollow, want..." The Carter's life became unbearable. Neighbors began to avoid them. Rumors spread quickly in a town like St. Anselm. Some said Michael was possessed. Others called it madness. A few whispered that the Carters had brought it upon themselves, that they must have invited something dark. Daniel grew furious at the gossip. He kept mostly to himself, but I noticed a hard edge forming in him. His faith in the church wavered. He accused Keane of cowardice, of letting bureaucracy delay what was urgent. "While they wait," he told me once, "my son is being eaten alive." Sarah, on the other hand, oscillated between hope and despair. She begged the hospital to readmit Michael, even as she clung to her rosary beads at night. She once told me, through tears, "I don't care if it's sickness or demons, I just want someone to save him." The hospital board grew cautious. Word of Michael's case reached administrators who worried about liability. They urged me not to encourage supernatural thinking. They preferred the diagnosis remain under the umbrella of psychiatric illness, psychosis, possibly schizophrenia. Yet privately, my colleagues admitted unease. One nurse confessed she heard him muttering in her native Polish one night, though he had never learned the language. By mid-June, the strain was visible on everyone. Daniel looked 20 years older. Sarah's hands shook constantly. Even Keane seemed diminished, his homilies subdued, his eyes shadowed. And Michael was fading. His frame grew thinner, his voice weaker, except during the episodes. In those moments, he seemed filled with a strength that was not his own. His words cut deeper, carried conviction. On June 19th, during another prayer session, he suddenly began to laugh, a hollow, echoing laugh that seemed to fill the house. He tilted his head back, and in that unnatural voice he said, 29 thrones. All waiting. You cannot stop it. Sarah covered her ears. Daniel shouted at Keen to keep praying, but Keen froze, pale and trembling. He looked at me as though seeking permission to stop. I nodded. He closed the book. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Later that week, I sat with Michael privately, without his parents or the priest. I asked him gently if he wanted this to end. His lips trembled. In his own fragile voice, he whispered, "Yes, but they don't." I asked, "Who are they?" He shook his head. "If I tell you, they'll come faster." I pressed him, gently but firmly. "Michael, what is the number 29? His face twisted in pain. Then, in that gravelly tone that no longer startled me but still chilled me, he muttered, "The Count, the Chosen, the ones inside." When he lifted his eyes to mine, I swear I saw something I still cannot rationalize. For an instant, his pupils seemed divided, like two dark shapes within each eye, shifting independently. Then he blinked, and it was gone. That night, Sarah called me in tears. Michael had stopped speaking altogether. He only sat on the floor of his room, tracing invisible patterns on the wood. When she tried to touch him, he whispered a single line. "They're almost ready." By the end of June, the Carter home felt less like a house and more like a quarantine. Curtains stayed drawn. Visitors no longer came. Even relatives from nearby towns had stopped checking in. Sarah admitted she no longer slept in her own bed. She spent nights in the hallway outside Michael's door, listening, waiting for the sounds that always came. Whispers, knocks, sometimes scratching. I remember the first time I heard it myself. June 23rd. I was sitting with Daniel in the kitchen, reviewing notes for a report I intended to send to the hospital board. We both froze at the same moment. A sound drifted from upstairs, faint but unmistakable. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing across the length of Michael's room. The problem was, Michael was in the kitchen with us at the time. Daniel rose without a word and marched upstairs. I followed. He flung open the door to Michael's room. Empty, nothing disturbed, nothing out of place, except for the faint smell, acrid and metallic like iron. Daniel swore under his breath. I glanced back at Michael, who sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall. He hadn't moved. That was the first time I considered that whatever afflicted him might not be contained within him. On June 25th, word arrived from the diocese. Father Keen received a letter confirming permission to begin formal investigation toward an exorcism, but with a stern reminder. Such measures should only proceed if all medical explanations had been exhausted. It was the Church's careful dance with skepticism and science. I was asked to contribute a psychiatric assessment for the file. I wrote cautiously. My report detailed symptoms of psychosis, but I added a final line that made me uneasy, even as I typed it. There remain elements in this case which resist conventional psychiatric explanation. Keen read the letter aloud to the Carters that evening. Daniel exploded. "Investigation? More delays? My son doesn't have time for their paperwork." Sarah tried to soothe him, but her own faith was cracking. She asked Keen through tears, "Why won't they help us? Why are they afraid?" Keen had no answer. He looked diminished, his collar loose, his hands trembling as he folded the letter. Later that night, I saw him sitting alone in his car outside the Carter house, his head bowed against the steering wheel. The manifestations worsened. One morning, Sarah found every family photograph in the living room turned face down. She swore she hadn't touched them. Michael, when asked, only whispered, "They don't like faces." Another evening, while I was present, a sharp crack echoed through the house. We rushed into Michael's room. The overhead light had shattered, glass scattered across the floor. Michael sat in the corner unharmed, but his lips moved soundlessly. When I crouched closer, I realized he was mouthing the number 29 over and over again. The Carters began to record these events. Old cassette tapes, grainy camcorder footage. Daniel wanted proof, but the recordings never captured the worst moments. The whispers, the footsteps, the laughter, always absent on playback. What remained were only fragments. Michael muttering, the sound of Sarah crying, doors slamming in the distance. The absence of evidence drove Daniel into rage. He accused me, the hospital, the church, everyone, of turning their backs on him. "If no one helps, I'll do it myself," he told me once, his eyes red-rimmed, his voice raw. On June 29th, Keane attempted another prayer session. I was there. Michael sat motionless as the priest began the litany. For several minutes nothing happened. Then, without warning, a deep crack split the plaster above the doorway. A long fissure spread upward, as if the house itself were groaning under invisible weight. Sarah screamed. Daniel rushed to hold her. Michael lifted his head. His voice was calm but wrong, layered, as if more than one speaker overlapped. "It isn't just him anymore." Keane froze. His hands shook so badly he dropped the vial of holy water. It shattered on the floor. The session ended in chaos. That night, I sat with Keane on the back porch. He smoked a cigarette, something I never thought I'd see from a priest. His voice was low, exhausted. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted. "I wasn't trained for this. They gave me books, prayers. But nothing prepares you for looking into a child's eyes and not seeing him anymore." I asked if he believed Michael was truly possessed. He exhaled smoke, watching it curl into the night air. Belief stopped being the question. The question is whether I'm strong enough. The Carter household had become a battlefield of doubt. Sarah begged for more doctors. Daniel insisted on more prayers. Keane stalled, caught between fear and duty. And Michael drifted further each day into silence. He barely spoke in his own voice anymore. Most of what left his mouth belonged to others. Strangers, men, women, sometimes more than one at once. The last words I heard from him that week chilled me more than any outburst. He leaned toward me during a quiet moment, his lips barely moving. "They said you'll see number 1 soon." I asked what that meant. He only smiled faintly, then turned away. By early July, the Carters had reached their breaking point. Sarah begged the diocese directly, writing letters filled with desperation. Daniel threatened to leave the church altogether if nothing was done. And Keane, after weeks of hesitation, finally told me in a hushed voice, "They've approved it, the exorcism." But even then, his eyes betrayed him. There was no relief, only dread. Because by then, the number on Michael's wall had begun to change. The faint black scrawl, once 29, now bore a second mark below it. 28. The morning Daniel showed me the wall, he was pale with fury. "Look," he hissed, dragging me into Michael's bedroom. There it was. Below the original scrawl of 29, a second number had appeared in the same jagged handwriting, 28. "What does it mean?" Sarah whispered, her voice thin and frayed. Daniel's jaw clenched. "It means something is happening. Something's counting down." Michael sat on the floor, cross-legged, tracing the outline of the numbers with one finger. When I asked him what they meant, he didn't look at me. He only muttered, "They're getting ready." That phrase, "getting ready," repeated itself in my notes over and over. No explanation, no context, just a constant, gnawing sense of anticipation. By early July, confirmation arrived from the diocese. Permission was granted for a formal rite of exorcism. It would be conducted under strict guidelines, with documentation required for every session. Father Keane was named the lead, though the bishop's letter advised consultation with a more experienced exorcist from the Chicago Archdiocese. When Keane read this aloud, Daniel exploded. "We don't have time to wait for some stranger from Chicago," he shouted. "It's happening now, under our roof." Sarah tried to soothe him, but her own faith wavered. She clutched Keane's sleeve and begged, "Please, Father, please don't delay. Just do it." Keane nodded, but his hands trembled as he closed the letter. I could see it in his eyes. He was terrified. The preparations began quietly. The Carter living room was cleared of furniture, except for a wooden chair where Michael would sit. Candles were placed at each corner. A simple crucifix was mounted on the wall. Keane arrived with a leather-bound Roman ritual, a rosary, and a small brass aspergillum for holy water. It all felt painfully inadequate for what we were facing. I agreed to act as a witness, both in my capacity as a doctor and, though I admitted this only to myself, as someone who had already begun to doubt the boundaries of psychiatry. The session was scheduled for July 7th. In the days leading up to it, Michael's condition deteriorated rapidly. He refused food altogether. His body grew skeletal, his eyes sunken. Yet when the voices came, he spoke with unnatural force. Once, during a whispered conversation, he said, "They want to be seen." All of them. The wall in his bedroom confirmed it. Below 28, another number appeared. 27. The night before the ritual, Sarah confessed something to me in the kitchen while Daniel slept in a chair nearby. Her voice was barely audible above the hum of the refrigerator. "Sometimes, when I look at him, I don't see him anymore. I see someone else. And I'm afraid that if this fails, I'll lose him forever." Her hands shook as she gripped a mug of cold coffee. "What if it isn't just him? What if it spreads?" I had no answer. July 7th arrived heavy with heat. The air in the Carter home felt thick, oppressive, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Michael was led to the chair without protest. His wrists were not tied, though Daniel hovered nearby in case restraint was needed. Keane began with the litany of the saints. His voice wavered but steadied as he pressed forward. Michael sat motionless, his gaze fixed on the crucifix. For the first several minutes, nothing happened. Then, slowly, his lips curved into a smile. "You're too late," he whispered. The voice was not his own. Keane sprinkled holy water. Michael hissed, jerking violently against the chair. His eyes rolled back, whites showing, but then snapped forward again. His voice deepened, layered, overlapping itself in ways that made the air vibrate. "We are here." Sarah covered her ears. Daniel clenched his fists, tears streaming down his face. Keane pressed the crucifix to Michael's forehead. "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you, leave this child." Michael convulsed, thrashing against the chair. Spittle flew from his mouth as he screamed, "You cannot break 29!" Then came a sound I will never forget. Laughter. Not Michael's, not human. It filled the room, echoing from the walls themselves. I felt my stomach twist. Keane faltered, but continued reading, voice hoarse, commanding. Michael shrieked again, then fell silent, slumping forward. For a moment we thought it was over. But then he lifted his head. His eyes glowed, not literally luminous, but wide and unblinking, fixed on us with inhuman intensity. His lips parted. "One is ready." And then he collapsed unconscious. We laid him on the couch. His breathing was shallow but steady. Sarah stroked his hair, whispering prayers through sobs. Daniel stared at the floor, his jaw locked. Keane closed the ritual book with shaking hands. He looked at me, his face ashen. "This isn't just him," he murmured. "This house, this family, they've all been marked." I didn't know what to say. When we went upstairs later, the wall bore another change. Beneath 27, a new number had appeared. 26. Michael slept for nearly 20 hours after the first rite. When he finally woke, he was weak but strangely lucid. Sarah cried when he asked for water in his normal voice. For a brief moment, hope returned to the house. But it didn't last. That night, while the rest of us tried to rest, Daniel woke to the sound of movement in the kitchen. He found Michael standing barefoot on the linoleum, staring at the window. "What are you doing, son?" Daniel asked softly. Michael didn't turn around. "They're outside," he whispered. "They want to come in." Daniel's chest tightened. He later told me he checked the yard, the street, even the driveway. Nothing, just darkness and the sound of crickets. But when he returned to the kitchen, Michael was gone. He found him in his room, crouched beside the wall. Another number had appeared. 25. The church's representative from Chicago had still not arrived, leaving Keane to continue alone. He was reluctant, but Daniel insisted. "Every day we wait, it gets worse." So a second session was held on July 10th. This time, Keane brought another priest for support, Father Ruiz, a younger man of Mexican heritage who spoke quietly but carried a deep conviction. He told us his grandmother had been a curandera and that he believed the church sometimes underestimated the spiritual battle ordinary people witnessed. The ritual began at dusk. Michael resisted immediately, his body tensing, his voice deepening into that layered growl we had heard before. When the prayers began, the room chilled. My breath fogged in front of me despite the July heat. Candles flickered violently. Sarah clutched my arm so tightly her nails drew blood. Keen shouted the commands, holding the crucifix inches from Michael's face. Michael's head jerked unnaturally, his gaze locking onto Ruiz. "You!" the voice snarled. "You know us!" Ruiz didn't flinch. He pressed his rosary to Michael's chest. "In Christ's name, I command you to reveal yourselves." Michael's mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. His eyes fluttered rapidly, then focused. What came next was not a scream but a series of names, spat out in different tones, some guttural, some high-pitched, overlapping like a chorus. I won't write them all here, but the last one chilled me most. It was the name of a local man who had died 6 months earlier, in a car accident that happened less than 2 miles from the Carter home. Sarah sobbed. Daniel turned pale. "Stop this!" Keen barked, thrusting the crucifix forward. "You will not torment us with lies." But Michael laughed again. "Not lies, witnesses." After 3 hours, Michael collapsed once more. His pulse was weak, his body trembling with exhaustion. Ruiz whispered prayers over him until he stabilized. When I examined him afterward, I noticed something unusual. Under his fingernails, a dark residue, almost like soil. I scraped a sample and later confirmed it under microscope. It was dirt. Ordinary, yes, but the question was, from where? No one had seen him outside. No one had seen him dig. And yet, his fingernails told another story. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat awake at the kitchen table, replaying the words in my mind. Not lies. Witnesses. I kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see faces pressed against the glass. Just before dawn, I heard Michael stir upstairs. His voice drifted through the air vents, soft but clear. He was reciting the Lord's Prayer, backward. In the morning, Sarah showed me the wall again. Beneath 25, another number had appeared, 24. But something else was different this time. Next to the number, scratched faintly into the paint, was a crude drawing, a circle with a line through it. Daniel stood staring at it, his jaw tight. "It's not just counting down anymore," he said. "It's keeping score." I couldn't disagree. Later that day, I convinced Sarah and Daniel to step outside with me, if only for a walk around the yard. They hadn't left the house in days. The moment we stepped out, Sarah gasped. In the soft earth beneath Michael's bedroom window, there were dozens of small handprints pressed into the dirt. Too small to be Daniel's, too delicate to be Sarah's. Some overlapped, some pointed toward the house, and there were 24 of them. Exactly. The Chicago priest arrived on July 12th. His name was Father Matthew Hargrove, a man in his late 50s with a reputation for discretion and discipline. He wore no clerical collar when he stepped out of the sedan, only a plain black shirt and jacket. He looked more like a retired detective than a priest. He greeted Daniel and Sarah with restrained warmth, then turned to Father Keen and Ruiz. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharp. He wasted little time on pleasantries. "Before I see the boy," Hargrove said, "I want to see the room." Daniel led us upstairs. When Hargrove entered Michael's bedroom, he froze. He studied the wall in silence, his gaze fixed on the sequence of numbers. 29, 28, 27, 26, 25, 24. Each one darker, deeper than the last, and beside the newest, the circle with a line through it. Hargrove exhaled. "This isn't typical." "What does it mean?" Sarah asked, her voice small. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he crouched, running his fingers lightly over the carved lines. "This is deliberate," he said finally. "Methodical. Something is announcing itself in stages." "Announcing what?" I asked. He stood, his expression unreadable. "That remains to be seen." When Michael saw Hargrove, He didn't react with the same immediate hostility he had shown to Keane or Ruiz. Instead, he smiled faintly, almost knowingly, as if he had been waiting. "You came late," he whispered. Daniel clenched his fists. "Don't listen to it." But Hargrove didn't seem shaken. He sat across from Michael, opened his ritual book, and began to pray in Latin. Michael listened, his face calm, his lips moving silently. Then, in a voice eerily identical to Hargrove's own, he began repeating the prayer, word for word, tone for tone. The effect was chilling. It was like listening to a recording play back in real time. Sarah covered her face with both hands, sobbing. Hargrove didn't falter, though a muscle in his jaw tightened. He continued until Michael broke into laughter, his voice returning to its layered chorus. "We like you," the voices said. "You understand the rules." That evening, after Michael was sedated into restless sleep, the priests held a closed-door discussion in the Carters' dining room. I was invited as a medical witness, though my role felt increasingly irrelevant. Keane pressed his case. "You've seen it for yourself. This is beyond a psychiatric condition. We need to proceed with full rights immediately." But Hargrove was cautious. "I've seen possession, Father. I've also seen hysteria, malingering, and neurological illness mistaken for possession. The danger is rushing in too deep. The ritual must be precise, measured." Daniel slammed his fist on the table. "My son doesn't have time for measured. Look at him. He's wasting away while you argue theology." Sarah said nothing. She sat in silence, clutching her rosary, her knuckles bone white. Hargrove finally sighed. "We'll continue, but on my terms. If you want chaos, if you want the boy's mind ripped apart, then ignore me. If you want any chance of saving him, you'll listen." That night, no one slept. The house was restless. Doors creaked open on their own. A steady tapping sound echoed from the walls, rhythmic, like fingernails on wood. Sarah swore she heard whispers in the hall, though when I checked, the space was empty. At 3 a.m., a crash jolted everyone awake. We rushed to Michael's room. He was standing on his bed, arms outstretched, staring at the crucifix on the wall. "It's broken," he said softly. The crucifix had fallen. The nail that had held it was bent, as though twisted from within the wall. When Daniel rushed to pick it up, Michael giggled. "Not strong enough," he said. Then he turned to Hargrove, his smile widening. "You know what's coming." On July 13th, the ritual resumed. This time Hargrove took lead. His Latin was firm, precise, without hesitation. Ruiz supported, Keane held the crucifix, and Daniel stood guard. I recorded vitals, though my hands shook the entire time. The voices inside Michael did not resist immediately. They let him slump, calm, his head bowed as if in prayer. For several minutes, the room was still. Then he began to speak, not in tongues, not in growls, but in ordinary English. "There are 24 left." Everyone froze. "What do you mean?" Hargrove asked. Michael lifted his head, his eyes sharp, lucid. "One has already gone." "Gone where?" Keane demanded. Michael's lips curved into that familiar, chilling smile. "Into the walls." The lights flickered. A loud knock thundered through the ceiling, as though something massive had struck the roof. Sarah screamed. Daniel grabbed her, shielding her. And then Michael whispered with the voice of a man long dead, "You buried me at St. Andrew's, but you didn't bury me deep enough." Daniel's face drained of blood. He whispered hoarsely, "St. Andrew's is where my father's grave is." Michael's laughter filled the room again, high and shrill. When it finally stopped, the wall bore its newest mark. 23. After the July 13th session, Father Hargrove called for a pause. He asked for parish records from St. Andrew's, as well as obituaries from the county archives. I joined him at the rectory office the next morning, bringing my medical notebook more out of habit than need. We sat in a dim, dusty room while the parish secretary, Mrs. Whitcomb, fetched boxes of old burial logs. She gave us a wary look as she set them down. "What exactly are you looking for, Father?" Hargrove didn't answer directly. "Just patterns," he said. The records went back decades. As we combed through them, something unsettling took shape. In the past 30 years, 29 burials had occurred at St. Andrew's, involving unnatural deaths. Accidents, suicides, drownings, unexplained tragedies. The names didn't form a neat list, but when Hargrove laid them out chronologically, they aligned almost perfectly with the sequence we had heard, whispered in Michael's room. 29 deaths. Michael had named one of them during the second exorcism, the man killed in a car crash months earlier. And now, with the count reduced to 23, the implication was terrifying. Each spirit bound to those deaths was somehow tethered to Michael. Hargrove shut the logbook with a grim snap. "This isn't a possession by a single entity," he said. "This is a congregation." "A congregation of the dead?" I asked. He looked at me steadily. "Of something that uses the dead." Back at the Carter home, the atmosphere grew unbearable. The smell of mildew seeped from the walls. Lights buzzed and dimmed without reason. At night, a scraping noise moved along the ceilings, as if claws dragged slowly across the beams. Sarah barely ate anymore. She stayed close to Michael, whispering prayers at his bedside. Daniel drank in silence, his Bible open, but unread. On July 14th, I entered Michael's room to check his vitals. He was lying flat, his eyes closed. At first, I thought he was asleep. Then he spoke, in a whisper so soft I leaned closer. "Do you hear them walking?" "Who?" I asked. "The ones in the walls," he said. "They don't stay still anymore." That night, I did hear them. It began as faint footfalls above the ceiling, deliberate, measured, not the creaks of an old house, but the rhythm of pacing. Then came voices, muffled at first, then sharper, closer, as though multiple people were whispering in the next room. When I checked the hallway, it was empty. Everyone else was asleep. But the whispers continued, following me like a current of air. By morning, I was convinced the house was no longer just a backdrop. It was participating. July 15th brought another session. This time, Hargrove changed the approach. He instructed Ruiz to anoint each doorway with holy oil. Keane held the crucifix at the threshold, while the ritual began in the living room again. Michael resisted immediately, thrashing in the chair. His voice cracked with rage. "You can't hold us all," he screamed, his tones splitting into overlapping layers. "One leaves, another enters. By the authority of Christ, you will name yourselves," Hargrove commanded. Michael jerked, his neck twisting at an angle that made my stomach turn. Then came the names again, but this time they weren't just local dead. They were ancient, foreign-sounding, guttural, but interspersed were names we recognized. Townsfolk long buried, classmates of Daniel's from decades past, even Sarah's cousin who had drowned as a teenager. Sarah collapsed at the sound, wailing. The voices laughed through Michael's mouth. "You carry them with you," they hissed. "You keep them alive, and we grow stronger." Hargrove pressed harder, his voice unrelenting. Michael's body shook violently, then went rigid. His head dropped, his chest heaved, and then silence. When he lifted his face, his eyes were his own. His voice was small, childlike. "They said one of you will die before it ends." Then he collapsed again. Afterward, Hargrove gathered us. His face was pale, sweat-soaked. "This isn't a simple exorcism," he admitted. "It's not even a rare one. This," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully, "is coordinated, intelligent. They're not only inside the boy, they're inside this house, this family, and they don't intend to leave quietly." Daniel muttered. "Then what the hell do we do?" Hargrove closed the ritual book slowly. "We prepare for a war of attrition, one by one." That night, Sarah woke screaming. When we rushed to her, she was sitting upright in bed, pointing at the wall. There, freshly carved in the plaster beside the numbers, was a new message. "We are 23, soon 22. The writing was deep, jagged, as though clawed into the wall while we slept. But the worst part wasn't the words, it was the handprint beside them, small, childlike, and identical to Michael's. The morning after Sarah's scream, Father Hargrove made a decision. "If this is going to continue in increments," he said, "then we fight in increments, one spirit at a time." His tone was firm, but the shadows under his eyes betrayed exhaustion. We all felt it. The house had become a suffocating place. The air seemed heavy, metallic, as though charged with electricity. Every sound echoed longer than it should have. Daniel resisted. What if pulling one makes the others angrier? Hargrove didn't flinch. They're already angry, but the boy is wasting away. We don't have the luxury of waiting. On July 16th, preparations were made. The living room was stripped bare again. This time the priests placed small bowls of salt at the four corners. A crucifix was positioned above the chair where Michael would sit, and a vial of holy water stood on the table beside the ritual book. Ruiz explained it quietly to Sarah. We will not try to banish them all today. We will call one by name, one only. If we succeed, we weaken the chain. Sarah nodded numbly. She had stopped arguing, stopped crying. Her face looked hollow, as though her body was present, but her soul was somewhere else. Michael was led into the chair. He was gaunt, trembling, but he went without a struggle. His lips were cracked from dehydration. His eyes darted between the priests like a cornered animal. As Hargrove began, Michael's body stiffened. His breath grew ragged. When the Latin chants rose, the voices responded. They shrieked through him, dozens at once, overlapping like a chorus from some subterranean cathedral. The pitch was unbearable, rattling the walls. "Which of you will leave?" Hargrove shouted over the noise. The voices fell silent. Michael's head jerked, then tilted upward. His mouth opened, and a single voice emerged, deep and gravelly. "I am the one who drowned." Sarah gasped, collapsing against Daniel. Her cousin, the one who had drowned in the quarry as a teenager, had been named days earlier. Now the voice claimed to be him. Hargrove pressed forward, his crucifix outstretched. "By Christ's authority you are commanded to leave this child." Michael's body convulsed, his back arching against the chair. His teeth gnashed. His voice, or rather, the voice within, howled. "He is ours, all of them are ours." The lights above flickered violently. One bulb shattered, raining glass across the floor. Daniel shielded Sarah, while Ruiz grabbed the aspergillum and flung holy water onto Michael's chest. Michael shrieked, smoke rising where the droplets struck his skin. The smell was sharp, acrid, like burning hair. Hargrove continued the command relentlessly, his voice hoarse but unwavering. "Leave him! Leave him now!" Then it happened. Michael let out a scream so piercing it rattled my teeth. His entire body lifted from the chair, not dramatically but unmistakably, his heels scraping the floor before slamming back down. His chest heaved once, twice, then he vomited a thick stream of water onto the floor. It smelled of algae and rust. When he finished retching, his head slumped forward, his breathing steadied. For the first time in weeks, his skin looked less grey, his eyes less clouded. Sarah rushed forward, holding his face in her hands. "Michael? Baby?" He blinked at her. "Mom!" For a fleeting moment he was himself again. But then Daniel pointed at the wall. There, beneath the etched numbers, the countdown had shifted. 22. We should have felt relief. One spirit had gone. But instead the air thickened, darker than before. The house groaned, as if under strain. That night, while we tried to rest, a new sound emerged. Not footsteps, not whispers, but weeping. A steady, mournful sobbing that filled the halls. We searched every room. Nothing. The sound never stopped, just moved from wall to wall, floor to ceiling. When I passed Michael's door, I heard him whispering in his sleep. His lips moved silently, but one word was clear. 22. At dawn, Sarah found the bathroom mirror fogged, though no one had showered. Written across it, traced in condensation, were 3 words, "Not one by one." The morning after the mirror message, no one spoke over breakfast. Not Sarah, who stirred her untouched coffee, not Daniel, who stared at the table with red-rimmed eyes, not even Michael, who sat quietly, picking at a slice of bread without eating it. The silence pressed heavier than words. Finally, Hargrove broke it. "They warned us," he said simply. "They will not go quietly one by one. That message was not a bluff. It was a strategy." Sarah looked up sharply. "So what does that mean? We stop?" "No," Hargrove said. It means we prepare for escalation. By mid-afternoon, the retaliation began. It started with the smell, a rancid, sulphurous stench that seeped through the vents. I searched the house, expecting a dead animal in the crawl space. Nothing. Yet the odor followed us from room to room, intensifying near Michael. Then came the flies. Hundreds appeared within hours, crawling over windows, buzzing in clusters around the ceiling corners. No matter how many Daniel swatted, more seemed to emerge. And finally, at dusk, the walls began to bleed. It wasn't dramatic, not like a film. Thin rivulets of reddish-brown seeped from the seams where wall met ceiling. At first I thought it was rust from old pipes, but there were no pipes above the living room. Sarah fell to her knees, sobbing, while Ruiz whispered prayers under his breath. Michael just stared, detached, as if it didn't surprise him at all. That night, July 17th, the house erupted. At 2:47 a.m., Sarah's scream pierced the silence. We rushed to the master bedroom. She was sitting upright in bed, clawing at her throat. Dark bruises bloomed across her neck in the shape of fingers, though no one touched her. Daniel tried to pull her hands away, but they weren't the ones squeezing her. Hargrove forced the crucifix into her grip. The marks vanished instantly. Sarah collapsed, gasping. Before anyone could recover, a thunderous crash shook the house. Michael's bedroom door slammed shut with such force the frame cracked. From inside came the sound of furniture scraping violently across the floor, as though thrown by unseen hands. When Daniel forced the door open, Michael was pinned against the wall, his feet dangling a foot above the ground. His eyes were open but blackened, the whites consumed by shadow. Hargrove charged forward, pressing the crucifix to Michael's chest. "In Christ's name, release him." The boy dropped, limp, gasping for breath. His eyes flickered back to normal. But then, from the walls, the voices rose, not through Michael but all around us. A cacophony of overlapping screams, laughter, guttural sounds, dozens at once, shaking the air itself. The message was clear. We are not confined to him anymore. We gathered in the living room afterward, shaken. Sarah cradled Michael in her lap, rocking him gently. Daniel paced, fists clenched, muttering curses under his breath. Ruiz sat in silence, rosary beads slipping through his fingers. I asked the question no one else dared. What if they're right? What if they're not one by one? Hargrove's face was grey, exhausted. Then we're dealing with something I've never faced. Not possession, not haunting, but infestation. He looked at Michael, then at the wall where the countdown remained. 22. Still waiting, still marking. The next morning, I examined Michael for injuries. His throat bore faint scratches. His skin was pale, bruised along the ribs. But what unsettled me most were the new markings on his arms, small circles etched into his skin as though burned, each one crossed with a line. Sarah gasped when she saw them. "Like the one on the wall," she whispered. Michael didn't resist the exam, but he stared at me the entire time, unblinking. When I asked how he felt, he smiled faintly. "They said the next won't be me," he whispered. That evening, as the priests prepared for another session, a sudden crash shook the kitchen. We ran in to find every cabinet door hanging open, every dish shattered across the floor. The refrigerator door swung slowly, creaking, though no one had touched it. On the inside, written across the metal in something dark and sticky, were the words, "Next is her." Sarah collapsed against Daniel, trembling violently, and Michael, sitting at the table, whispered to no one, 21. The house felt heavier that morning, as if the air itself pressed down on us. Sarah moved like a ghost through the kitchen, clutching her rosary so tightly the beads dug into her skin. She wouldn't let go of Michael, shadowing him from room to room, as though the warning on the refrigerator had carved itself into her bones. But by midday, it became clear the message hadn't been just a threat. Sarah was washing dishes when she froze, her hand suspended over the sink. The water ran over her wrist, but she didn't blink. Daniel called her name once, twice, she didn't respond. Then slowly her head turned, too slowly, unnaturally, until her neck strained at the angle. Her eyes were rolled white. "Daniel," I said sharply, rushing forward. He grabbed her shoulders, shaking her. "Sarah! Sarah!" Her lips parted, but the voice that emerged was not hers. It was deep, resonant, male, and it laughed. Father Ruiz reacted first, flinging holy water toward her face. She shrieked, collapsing to the floor, convulsing violently. The sound of bones cracking echoed as her body bent backward in a grotesque arc, her fingers clawing at the tiles until her nails tore. "Not hers alone!" the voice bellowed. "All of them! All of them!" Hargrove barked the command. "Hold her down!" Daniel obeyed, tears streaming, while Ruiz pressed the crucifix against her chest. Her body jolted, the skin beneath the cross blistering as if burned. Sarah's eyes snapped forward again, her own voice bleeding through. "Make them stop, please," before being wrenched away by the guttural chorus of many voices layered together. Michael screamed from the doorway, clutching his head. "It hurts them when you do that. Stop, you're making them angry." But Ruiz didn't stop. The struggle lasted nearly 20 minutes. At the peak, Sarah's mouth opened impossibly wide, a piercing howl erupting from her throat, and every light bulb in the house shattered simultaneously. We were plunged into darkness, save for the flicker of candles. Then, just as suddenly as it began, she collapsed, limp, silent. Daniel held her in his arms, sobbing. "Sarah, talk to me. Please, just talk to me." Her eyes fluttered open, dazed. What happened?" She didn't remember a thing. Later, after she had been put to bed, Hargrove gathered us in the living room. His face was pale, the lines around his eyes deeper than ever. "It's no longer just the boy," he said gravely. "The infestation has spread. They're using the family as a network, moving from one host to another. I asked the question that hung in all our throats. Does that mean they can take any of us?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, it was worse than silence. "Yes, none of us are immune." That night, we took shifts watching Sarah and Michael. The priests prayed without pause. I sat with Daniel in the kitchen during the early hours, the exhaustion carving hollows in his face. "I should have listened," he muttered. "All the doctors, all the tests. I thought it was just Michael, but now Sarah..." His voice cracked. "I can't lose them both." Before I could answer, the clock on the wall clicked louder than usual. Click, click, click. Then it stopped. Every object in the kitchen froze in stillness. The hum of the refrigerator gone, the faint creak of pipes silent. The air was utterly dead. And from the doorway, Michael's voice cut through. 21, he whispered again. But this time his eyes weren't vacant. They were focused, knowing. And behind him, in the reflection of the darkened kitchen window, I swore I saw Sarah standing, though she was asleep upstairs. The following morning, Father Hargrove made the call none of us wanted to hear. "The bishop has been informed," he said, his voice thin from sleeplessness. "We've been given reluctant permission to begin the rite, but only under strict documentation. They want proof. Every word, every sound, every sign must be recorded." He glanced at me, then at Daniel. "That will be your task. Your witnesses. You will keep notes. We cannot afford the accusation of hysteria." Daniel nodded, though his hands trembled. "If it will help them, I'll do anything." The living room was cleared that afternoon. Furniture pushed aside, crucifixes mounted on the walls, bowls of holy water set at every corner. Candles were lit. Not for theatrics, but necessity since the electricity had become unreliable. The smell of wax and incense clung heavy to the air. Sarah sat in one chair, Michael in another, both restrained gently with leather straps. Neither resisted. Sarah looked pale, her lips pressed in prayer. Michael was quiet, staring down at his lap, murmuring numbers under his breath. 18, 19, 21. He skipped certain ones, circling back as though counting lives instead of digits. Father Ruiz placed the Roman ritual on the table, his thumb marking the page. His jaw was clenched so tight, the veins in his temple stood out. "We start together," Hargrove instructed. "They may attempt to divide us. Don't respond to taunts, don't argue with them. We speak only the words of the rite." The first prayers began smoothly, their Latin rising steady and rhythmic. filling the room with solemn authority. Daniel gripped Sarah's hand, whispering encouragement despite Ruiz's warnings. I wrote each moment down, my pen struggling to keep up with the mounting intensity. It was during the Litany of the Saints that Sarah's body jerked violently against the straps. Her head snapped back, eyes rolling white, a guttural sound tearing from her throat. "Leave her," Ruiz commanded, pressing the crucifix against her forehead. Her skin hissed audibly, blistering beneath the metal. Michael cried out then as though struck by an unseen hand. His own body convulsed, mirroring Sarah's every spasm. "Stop it! You're hurting us both!" he screamed. For a moment I thought he was simply empathizing with her pain. But then I saw it, the same dark rippling beneath his skin that writhed beneath hers. The connection was unmistakable. The prayers grew louder, candles sputtered. My notes blurred as I tried to keep up. Suddenly Sarah went limp. Michael stiffened, and from his mouth poured her voice. "Daniel, help me." Daniel lunged forward, but Hargrove blocked him with one arm. "It's not her! Don't listen!" But then Sarah's own lips moved, releasing a deeper, layered male voice. "They cannot bind us. We move as one. Strike one vessel, we bloom in another." The realization hit us all at once. The ritual wasn't isolating the demons. It was teaching them to transfer. For nearly 2 hours the priests battled, alternating prayers, sprinkling holy water, pressing relics against their bodies. Each time Sarah weakened, Michael writhed stronger. Each time Michael faltered, Sarah screamed. It was like watching fire leap from one house to another across a dry field. At one point, both of them spoke simultaneously, the same words echoing in different tones. 29, 29. One by one they will fall, and what remains will never leave. Ruiz slammed his fist onto the table. "Enough! I command you in the name of Christ, be gone!" The room exploded with a sound like shattering glass. Every candle extinguished in unison. The straps snapped, flinging both Sarah and Michael onto the floor. Silence followed. Then Sarah coughed weakly, curling into herself. Michael lay motionless, his chest heaving. Had it worked? Daniel rushed to them, cradling both in his arms. "It's over," he whispered. "It has to be over." But as I knelt closer, I noticed something that froze my blood. On Sarah's arm, faint and red, the number 21 was scratched into her skin. On Michael's wrist, the same number appeared, but darker, deeper, as though carved from within. Neither of them had moved when it was written. Neither of them had touched each other, and neither seemed aware it was there at all. The house was quiet after the failed exorcism, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that follows a storm, the air still charged, the threat not gone, but waiting. Sarah slept in the guest room under sedation. Daniel refused to leave her side. Michael sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. Father Ruiz broke the silence first. "We didn't drive them out," he admitted. His voice was hoarse, worn down by hours of prayer. "We only showed them how to move." "No!" Daniel snapped from the other room. His voice cracked. "No, you hurt them. You made it worse." Hargrove didn't argue. He simply closed the ritual book, set it gently on the table, and said, "We'll need to escalate. The bishop will require documentation." He looked at me. "Your notes. Everything you wrote down. It must be delivered." I agreed, though my hands shook when I gathered the pages. Each line felt like a betrayal, as though recording their torment had somehow invited more of it. That night I lay awake on the sofa, pen still in hand, replaying every moment. The voices, the body convulsions, the switching between Sarah and Michael. But one detail returned again and again, the numbers. 29, 21. Why those? The answer came sooner than I wanted. Around 3 in the morning, Michael wandered into the living room. He didn't look at me. He only sat on the floor, knees drawn to his chest. "They don't like the prayers," he whispered. His voice wasn't altered. It was his own. "When you read them, they scatter. But they don't leave. They hide." I swallowed. "Where do they hide, Michael?" He raised his head then, eyes glassy. "Inside the ones you love." Before I could respond, his lips moved again, only faster, sharper, as if words were being shoved through him. "Tomorrow, the bird will strike the glass. 7 pieces. Blood on the sill." I leaned forward. "Michael, what are you saying?" He blinked, confused, and then looked at me as though waking from sleep. Did I say something? The next morning, the prediction unfolded in brutal simplicity. Sarah had just opened the window when a blackbird slammed against the glass. The pane cracked into 7 jagged shards, scattering across the floor. Blood smeared the sill where the bird's body crumpled. Daniel screamed at me as if I'd been complicit. "You knew something. You wrote everything down. You knew this would happen." But I hadn't. Not until after. Michael didn't even look surprised. He just muttered under his breath. One came true. The priests couldn't ignore it. "We must tread carefully," Ruiz said that afternoon, pacing the living room like a caged animal. "The church is already skeptical. If we report visions or prophecies, they'll dismiss the case as hysteria or manipulation." But it happened, I countered, exactly as he said it would. Hargrove nodded slowly. "Yes, and if he begins to predict more, we may not have the luxury of choosing what to share. Evidence will speak for itself." Daniel slammed his fist on the table. "You're still thinking about reports, about proof? My children are being torn apart in front of you, and you're worried about bishops and paperwork." The room went silent. Then Sarah's voice carried weakly from the hallway. "It's not just him." We turned. She was leaning against the wall, pale, trembling. "They showed me something too," she whispered. "Not numbers, faces." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "I saw us, all of us, dead." That night, Michael refused to sleep in his room. He curled up on the living room rug, staring at the ceiling. I stayed nearby, unwilling to leave him alone. Sometime past midnight, he whispered, "It's getting closer. 22. I froze. "What's 22? He turned his head toward me, his eyes shining in the candlelight. "The next one." The word hung in the room like smoke. 22. None of us slept. Daniel sat upright in a chair, holding Sarah's hand. Father Ruiz and Father Hargrove prayed in alternating turns, their voices hoarse and trembling. I stayed near Michael, who lay on the rug staring at the ceiling as if waiting for something to descend. The house felt wrong, like it was leaning inward, pressing us together. Every creak of the floorboards made Daniel flinch. When dawn finally bled through the curtains, we were all still awake. By mid-morning, a car pulled into the driveway. 2 men stepped out, both in clerical collars but not parish priests. One carried a leather briefcase, the other held a reel-to-reel recorder. "The diocesan investigators," Hargrove muttered. His jaw tightened. Introductions were short. They were Fathers Brennan and Keene, sent not to assist, but to evaluate. Their presence was cold, clinical. They shook no hands, offered no reassurances. They set up their equipment in the living room and demanded we continue as normal. "Document everything," Brennan ordered. "Do not interfere. We need evidence." To them, it was not suffering, but data. Michael didn't speak for most of the day. He sat curled in the corner, chewing his fingernails until they bled. The investigators watched him like hawks, scribbling notes each time he twitched. Then, just before dusk, he stiffened. His body went rigid, eyes darting to the window. "It's here," he whispered. "Number 22. Daniel dropped to his knees beside him. "What is it, Michael? Tell me what you see." Michael's voice grew flat, detached, as though reporting from somewhere else. "A woman. At the market. She drops her basket. Apples everywhere. The car doesn't stop." He blinked once, then curled into himself, rocking back and forth. Her neck. Wrong way." The investigators exchanged a quick glance. Brennan asked sharply, "Where? Which market?" Michael shook his head. "I don't know the name. Just the place. The red awning. The smell of fish." Daniel gripped the boy's shoulders. He's never even been to town, he insisted, eyes wild. He doesn't know the stalls. He doesn't... But an hour later, when the phone rang, Brennan answered, his face drained of color. He set the receiver down slowly. A woman was struck by a car outside the market on 5th, red awning, neck broken. The room fell silent. Sarah began to sob quietly, rocking in her chair. Daniel buried his face in his hands. Ruiz whispered a prayer under his breath, his voice trembling. But it was Michael who spoke again, louder this time, his voice strained as if fighting something inside. "They're showing me more," he said. His gaze locked onto Brennan. "They want me to say it. They want me to tell you what's coming." Brennan, still pale, steadied himself. "And what is coming, boy?" Michael's lips trembled before the words slipped out in a voice that wasn't quite his own. "Number 23 is one of you." Panic set in. Keane demanded the session stop immediately. Brennan wanted to continue. The priests argued among themselves, their voices colliding like storm waves. Daniel shouted at all of them to leave his children alone. But I kept watching Michael. His eyes were fixed on nothing, his small frame trembling violently. He was counting again under his breath. 24, 25. Each number carried weight. Not just a count, but a promise. That night, no one dared sleep. The investigators stayed, their recorder running, though neither looked eager to be in the house anymore. Ruiz insisted we double the prayers. Hargrove suggested fasting. Daniel poured himself whiskey until his words slurred. At one point, Sarah whispered to me, "They're not numbers. They're steps." I asked her what she meant, but she only shook her head, eyes glassy. "Steps toward the last one. Toward the one that stays." Her words lodged in me like splinters. Just after midnight, Michael stirred from the rug where he lay. His voice was quiet but clear. "It's not over," he said. "It's only beginning." He turned his head toward Brennan, staring with unblinking focus. "You'll see tomorrow." The house felt brittle the next morning, as though one wrong movement might shatter it completely. We moved carefully, whispering instead of speaking, as though volume itself might trigger something. But Michael's words from the night before kept circling in our minds. "Number 23 is one of you." The two investigators tried to mask their unease with professionalism. Brennan still scribbled dutiful notes, though his hand shook slightly. Keane clung to the recorder like it was a shield. Even Father Ruiz, steady as he'd been, avoided Michael's gaze. Only Hargrove seemed unchanged. He busied himself preparing another round of prayers, though I noticed the fatigue carved into his features. He looked years older than when I'd first met him. At noon, Brennan stepped outside to call the diocese. We could hear his low voice carrying through the thin walls, sharp with frustration. Michael sat at the table, head resting on his arms. He looked almost peaceful, but his lips moved faintly as if whispering to himself. Sarah approached him cautiously, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Michael, are you all right?" He lifted his head slowly. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, but his words were steady. "It's today." "What's today?" I asked. 23. We didn't have to wait long. When Brennan came back inside, his face was pale, his collar damp with sweat. He shut the door too quickly, like he was afraid something might follow him in. "An accident downtown," he said, his voice tight. "Father Doyle, heart attack, dead before the ambulance arrived." Father Ruiz lowered his head. Doyle was the one who argued against us proceeding. He called this case fraud, Hargrove finished quietly. Brennan nodded once. "He collapsed in front of the chancery. Witnesses said he clutched his chest, fell to his knees, and..." He broke off, swallowing hard. "I don't need to tell you the rest." Michael's voice cut through the silence. "That's not 23. Every head snapped toward him. He was sitting straighter now, his small hands folded neatly on the table. His tone was calm, almost casual. "It isn't him, he doesn't count, it's someone here." Brennan's pen slipped from his hand. "What do you mean?" Michael blinked slowly. "You'll see." From then on, paranoia consumed the house. Every cough, every stumble, every pause in breath was watched too closely. Daniel refused to let Sarah or Michael out of his sight. Brennan argued with Keane about whether to stay another night. Ruiz urged more prayer. By dusk, the tension had grown unbearable. That was when it happened. Keane was fiddling with the recorder, threading a new reel, when his body jerked suddenly. The machine clattered to the floor. He clutched his throat, gasping, his eyes bulging in terror. "Water!" Brennan shouted, rushing forward. But before anyone could move, Keane's body convulsed violently. He fell to his knees, a choking gurgle tearing from his throat. His arms twisted unnaturally, his jaw snapping open and shut like it belonged to something else. Michael's voice rose over the chaos. 23. We tried everything. Ruiz pressed the crucifix against Keane's chest, praying desperately. Brennan attempted CPR when the man collapsed fully, his lips turning blue. Daniel ran for water. Sarah screamed. I just stood frozen, my notes slipping from my hand, pages scattering across the floor. Within minutes, Keane lay still, lifeless. But his face, dear God, his face, bore a faint smile. Brennan staggered back, hands shaking. This can't. He pressed his palms over his eyes, muttering, "It's not possible." But it was. We had all seen it, and Michael had predicted it. Ruiz spoke what none of us wanted to admit. It isn't possession anymore. This is infestation, multiplication. These spirits, they are claiming lives. Daniel cradled Sarah, who wept silently into his chest. His voice was broken. "How many more until it stops?" Michael answered from the corner, his voice chillingly calm. "Until 29. That night, we sat in the living room with Keane's body covered under a sheet. Brennan tried frantically to contact the diocese, but the phone line cut twice mid-call, static shrieking through the receiver. Michael watched the covered body with unnerving stillness. When Brennan finally slumped into a chair, defeated, Michael turned to him and whispered, "You're 24. The dawn came grey and uneven, with streaks of faint light creeping through the church's arched windows. No one had slept properly. Father Gabriel sat slouched in the wooden pew, his head bowed, his hands trembling slightly from the fatigue of the night before. Beside him, Dr. Keller leaned against the stone wall, his face pale from lack of sleep, but his notebook already open, pages filled with hurried scrawls from the prior hours. Andreas sat curled on the cot, his head bent forward. For the first time in days he looked calm. His breathing was steady. His hands rested on his lap. The room carried the heavy silence of a place where something had just happened, something no one wanted to speak about yet. Mrs. Vogt clutched her rosary and watched her son with swollen eyes. She hadn't dared move closer since he had whispered "quiet" at her, in a voice that did not sound like his own. She knew, deep inside, that whatever spoke through Andreas the night before had not left. Around 7 o'clock, Father Gabriel finally stood. "We cannot let ourselves think it is finished," he said, voice hoarse. "The calm that follows is often worse than the storm itself." He looked at Keller, who gave a grim nod. "We continue tonight, but during the day, we must prepare differently." Dr. Keller closed his notebook. "I need to take him through some physical examinations again. His body is under severe strain, muscles, lungs, even his heart. If this continues, the damage might be irreversible." "Then we balance it," Gabriel replied. "Between saving his soul and saving his body, neither can be neglected." By midday, Andreas was awake and strangely cooperative. He asked for food, a small request, but significant. For weeks he had resisted eating, spitting meals out, claiming the food smelled like rot. Now he took bread and broth without protest. He even thanked his mother. It unsettled everyone more than his violence had. When Keller tested his reflexes and pulse, Andreas followed instructions obediently. But the boy's eyes remained distant, fixed not on Keller, but on something beyond him, as if watching a presence only he could see. Mrs. Vogt tried to interpret it as recovery, whispering to Keller, "Maybe he is better now, maybe God heard." But Keller's expression darkened. "Or it's saving strength," he said. "You don't survive weeks like this without rest. Something is conserving energy inside him." In the afternoon, Father Gabriel spoke with the parish council privately. Some had grown nervous about the secrecy surrounding Andreas's case. Whispers had already begun spreading in the village, strange noises at night, shadows in the church windows, Andreas's screams echoing through stone walls. A few parishioners had begun avoiding Mass. One council member confronted Gabriel directly. "If this gets out further, the diocese will intervene. They'll shut it down. You risk not only the boy's life, but the reputation of this church." Gabriel clenched his fists. "Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I chose for a child to be tormented under this roof? If the diocese comes, let them come. But until then, I will not abandon him." That night, preparations were more meticulous. Keller measured Andreas's vitals before the session. A bucket of water, clean cloths and blankets were kept nearby. Mrs. Vogt was asked to leave the main chamber. Her presence, Gabriel believed, only made the entities more volatile. She protested, but eventually sat outside the door, rosary in hand, listening. As evening descended, Andreas's demeanor shifted again. His body stiffened, his breathing grew ragged, and by the time the prayers began, his lips curled back into a sneer. "You pray," the voice said from him, lower than before, guttural. "But do you listen?" "He does not listen. He never has." Gabriel did not stop. His words rose steady and deliberate, Latin phrases cutting through the damp air. Keller recorded each phrase spoken by Andreas, every shift in tone. At one point, Andreas's hands twisted unnaturally backward, joints locking in positions that should have broken bone. Keller rushed forward terrified, but Gabriel shouted, "Do not touch him!" The voice laughed. "We bend him, but we do not break. Not yet." Andreas's head snapped to one side, his eyes rolling back. Then came the whispering, layered voices, rapid, incomprehensible, not one or two, but dozens overlapping until it became impossible to count them. Keller later wrote, "It was like standing beneath a swarm of bees that spoke with the memory of human tongues." Gabriel's voice grew louder, his command sharper, as he demanded each to name itself. The whispering became chaotic, then broke into singular words, one after another, names, places, fragments of sentences. Hunger, blood, betrayal, the drowned, the crippled, the one with no eyes. Keller's hand shook so violently, his writing became unreadable. Then silence. Andreas collapsed onto the cot, body trembling, sweat pouring down his forehead. His chest heaved violently as though he had been running for hours. Gabriel lowered his crucifix. His face was drained, aged by years in the space of minutes. 29, he whispered. "There are 29. Keller looked at him sharply. "You mean spirits?" "Yes," Gabriel said. His voice cracked. "And they are not leaving quietly." Outside the door, Mrs. Vogt's muffled sobs broke the silence. The session ended with Andreas unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady. Keller checked his pulse twice, convinced the boy would not wake. But as they prepared to leave, Andreas stirred, eyes fluttering open just enough to murmur one phrase, so faint that Gabriel had to kneel close to hear it. "They won't go until he comes." Gabriel's stomach sank. "Who?" he asked, but Andreas had already slipped back into unconsciousness, leaving only the echo of those words in the cold church air. Father Gabriel did not sleep that night. He sat in the sacristy with a candle guttering beside him, Andreas's faint words still echoing in his ears. "They won't go until he comes." He repeated the phrase over and over, but it yielded no clarity. Who was he? A person, a spirit, something else? The words chilled Gabriel more than the guttural voices, because this was not the demons taunting. It had been Andreas's own weak human voice speaking through exhaustion. Dr. Keller, equally restless, joined him near dawn. His face was pale, his tie loosened, his notebook clutched like a lifeline. If there really are 29 separate presences, Gabriel, then this isn't a single exorcism. It's a war. And if Andreas's body is the battlefield, it won't hold much longer. Gabriel rubbed his temples. "I know." His eyes flicked to the crucifix on the wall. "But that phrase, I fear it means they wait for someone, or something specific." and until then they will not leave. By morning, Mrs. Vogt demanded answers. "You said you could cast them out," she cried, her voice frayed with exhaustion. "And now you say there are 29? And now you say they will not go?" Her rosary rattled in her trembling hands. Gabriel tried to calm her. "We are fighting them. Each night, more of their strength is revealed. But Andreas spoke clearly last night. Something he has not done in weeks. That is a sign of his soul still fighting." She did not look convinced. Her trust had eroded with every sleepless night, every scream echoing through stone walls. That afternoon, Gabriel began combing through older parish records. Cases of possession in Bavaria were rare, but not unheard of. He searched for patterns, any mention of multiple spirits, any reference to a he that might have bound them together. Hours of leafing through brittle papers yielded almost nothing, until he came across a single note in a forgotten binder. "The collective will not scatter until the master is named." There was no date, no name attached. Only that cryptic line, buried between reports of minor parish disputes. Gabriel's pulse quickened. The master. Was this what Andreas meant? When he shared it with Keller, the doctor frowned deeply. "So we aren't dealing with chaos. We're dealing with hierarchy. A leader among them," he scribbled in his notes. "If that's true, then forcing one to reveal itself might destabilize the rest." "Or it might strengthen them," Gabriel said. "If the leader comes forward, the others may cling to it more fiercely." That night the exorcism began earlier, the air inside the church heavy with the scent of wax and stale incense. Andreas sat upright on the cot, eyes open before a single prayer was spoken. His lips curled, though he did not speak immediately. Gabriel raised the crucifix. "In the name of Christ, I command you to answer. Who is he?" For a long moment, silence. Then Andreas's mouth opened, and a low hum filled the chamber. Not a word, not a voice, but a vibration that made the wooden pews tremble. Keller's hand shook as he wrote, "Resonance unlike vocal ability of human throat." Finally words emerged, layered but intelligible. "He waits. He comes when the time is ripe. We keep the boy until he opens the door." Gabriel's heart pounded. "Who is he? Give him name." The voice broke into laughter, dry and splintered. "He has many names. To you he is silence, to us he is keeper. To the boy he will be father." The last word cut deep. Andreas had no father. His own had died years ago. Mrs. Vogt, listening outside, cried out at the word, but the heavy door kept her from entering. Gabriel pressed harder, his voice rising. "You will name him." Andreas's body convulsed, and then the voices split again into fragments, calling out in overlapping tones. "Judas, Rex, Der Blinde, Keeper of Ash." Keller gripped the edge of his chair, unable to keep up with the torrent. Gabriel felt the temperature of the room drop sharply, his breath fogging in the candlelight, and then, abruptly, silence. Andreas slumped backward, his chest heaving. The voices had retreated. Gabriel lowered the crucifix slowly. "They are circling, hiding him among names." Keller muttered, "Or testing how far we'll push before the boy's body breaks." They ended the session reluctantly, Andreas unconscious once more. Outside, Mrs. Vogt cornered Gabriel. Her eyes burned with desperation. "What is happening to my son?" she demanded. Gabriel hesitated, then answered quietly, "There are 29 spirits bound to him, but there is one above them, a master. Until he is named, they will not leave." Her face crumpled. "Then name him. Do whatever you must, but do not let my boy die waiting." That night, Keller wrote in his notes, "The exorcist pursues a name. The entities guard it. The boy suffers in between. I fear that identifying the leader may not save him, but seal him." When Gabriel finally extinguished the candles, one thought would not leave his mind. Andreas had whispered, "They won't go until he comes, not until he leaves." It meant the master was not gone at all. It meant he had not yet arrived. The morning after the session, the church felt colder than stone should allow. Father Gabriel walked the nave slowly. his steps echoing against high ceilings. He paused near the altar, staring at the crucifix as though searching for answers that refused to come. Dr. Keller entered quietly, a folded sheet of paper in his hand. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. "I transcribed every name they spoke," he said, offering the paper. "None of them align directly with saints or known demons in recorded cases, but some resemble fragments." Gabriel scanned the list. Judas, Rex, Derblinda, Keeper of Ash. He whispered them under his breath, tasting the weight of each. They carried menace, yet none felt whole. "They are smoke," Gabriel said finally, "covering something solid." Keller nodded grimly. "And each night we ask, Andreas pays for it." He hesitated, lowering his voice. "His pulse dropped alarmingly last night. He's losing weight at a dangerous rate. Another week like this, and we may not be debating theology. We'll be arranging a funeral." The words cut through Gabriel like a blade. For all his faith, the priest could not ignore the doctor's clinical warning. That afternoon, Mrs. Vogt refused to leave Andreas's side. She brushed his hair back, whispering prayers over him while he slept. To her, the boy looked smaller, fragile, as though the spirits were hollowing him from within. She turned on Gabriel once again. "If you cannot free him," she said, "then perhaps someone else must. Another priest. A stronger one." Gabriel did not reply. He knew the diocese would not sanction another exorcist without investigation, and by the time bureaucracy moved, Andreas might already be gone. As dusk fell, the three of them prepared for another session. This time, Gabriel resolved to force the issue. If there was truly a leader, it had to be drawn out, named and bound. Candles were lit along the walls, their flames shuddering against the draught. The crucifix gleamed faintly in Gabriel's hands as he began. Andreas stirred almost instantly, as if anticipating the ritual. His lips twitched, his eyes rolled upward, and when his mouth opened, it was not his voice that emerged. "You persist," the voice rasped, layered and dry. "The boy weakens, yet you persist." Gabriel stepped closer. "I command you in Christ's name. Who is the master among you? Name him." Andreas's body arched, his arms straining against unseen pressure. Then came laughter, dozens of voices, rising and falling, circling the rafters. Keller swore under his breath, clutching his pen tight, as if it might steady him. "You ask for the master," the voices sneered. "But he is not yours to summon. He comes when he wills, not when you call." Gabriel pressed harder, raising the crucifix high. "You will obey. Speak his true name." The room vibrated with the sheer force of the screams that erupted then, not from Andreas's mouth alone, but from every corner of the chamber. The candles flickered violently, some extinguishing altogether. Keller stumbled back, his notebook slipping from his hand. Andreas's eyes snapped open, pupils blown wide, his gaze fixed not on Gabriel but above his head. In a whisper so faint it almost vanished into the chaos, he murmured, "He is already here." Gabriel froze. "Where?" Andreas's face contorted, and the voices chorused through him, "Closer than breath, waiting, watching." At that exact moment, Keller swore he felt a pressure in the air, thick, suffocating, like a storm gathering indoors. His medical mind rejected it, but his body knew fear. And then Andreas laughed. It was high, shrill, almost childlike, and yet so hollow that it pierced everyone present. He leaned forward and whispered directly toward Gabriel, "Would you like to meet him, Father?" Gabriel's grip on the crucifix tightened until his knuckles whitened. "In Christ's name, I forbid it." The boy's head tilted unnaturally, his eyes glinting with something that was not human. "Then you already have." The silence that followed was heavier than the screams. Even the wind outside had died, leaving the church cloaked in an oppressive stillness. Andreas collapsed backward, unconscious once more. His chest rose and fell shallowly, as if each breath had to be wrestled free. Gabriel lowered the crucifix slowly, his hand trembling. Keller retrieved his notebook with unsteady fingers, scribbling furiously, though the words came jagged and broken. Mrs. Vogt rushed inside at last, unable to stay behind the door any longer. She clutched her son, weeping. "What did they do to him? What did you hear?" Gabriel hesitated, his lips moving soundlessly, before he found words. "They claim the master is already here." Her sobs grew louder. Keller turned away, unwilling to watch. Later, as the candles were snuffed and Andreas lay wrapped in blankets, Gabriel prayed silently in the darkness. But even as he prayed, he could not shake the sensation that something stood behind him listening. The church was quieter the following morning, but it was the wrong kind of quiet, not peace, oppression. Even the air seemed heavier, as though the stone walls themselves absorbed the screams from the night before and refused to let them go. Father Gabriel walked the aisles with his breviary, but he did not read aloud. His prayers caught in his throat. Every time he lifted his eyes toward the crucifix, he felt a coldness at the back of his neck, a sense of being observed. Dr. Keller, who had camped in the rectory overnight, emerged with bloodshot eyes and a stiffness in his step. He had reviewed his notes from the last session 3 times, and each time the same conclusion loomed larger. If the voices were to be believed, the master was not waiting to arrive. It was already present. When Keller found Gabriel, he laid the notebook on the pew between them. "I think we've misunderstood this," he said quietly. "It's not that the master comes later, it's that he's always been here, inside Andreas." Gabriel's brow furrowed. "You mean the other spirits are not independent, but subordinate?" "Exactly. Like organs in a body. The master is the core. The rest, extensions, masks." Gabriel closed the breviary and exhaled slowly. If that is true, then every attempt to expel the lesser spirits was meaningless. They never intended to leave. They only guard him. The realization left them both silent. That afternoon, Mrs. Vogt insisted on speaking. She looked more brittle than ever, but her voice carried a mother's stubborn strength. "Tell me the truth," she demanded. "No more half words, no more evasions. What is happening to my boy?" Gabriel hesitated. He wanted to protect her, but lies now would shatter everything. "There may be a leader among them," he admitted. "One spirit greater than the rest. Until it is revealed, none of the others will depart." Her face crumpled. "So it has not even begun yet?" "On the contrary," Keller said quietly. "It began the day your son first changed. What we've seen since has been the master biding its time." The woman's hands shook so violently that the rosary slipped to the floor. She did not pick it up. That evening the session began under protest. Mrs. Vogt begged them not to continue, fearing her son could not endure another night. But Gabriel insisted. They could not wait passively for the master to reveal itself. The candles were lit once more. Andreas, pale and gaunt, lay still on the cot. For several minutes, nothing happened. Gabriel began the prayers, Keller recorded. The silence stretched until the tension itself became unbearable. Then, without warning, Andreas sat upright. His eyes were wide open, pupils dilated, but he did not thrash, did not scream. Instead, he smiled faintly, an expression so alien on his face that both Gabriel and Keller froze. When he spoke, his voice was steady, not the chorus of spirits, not the fractured whispers, but a single measured tone. "You look for him," Andreas said. "He does not hide." Gabriel's pulse quickened. "Who are you speaking as?" Andreas's head tilted. "You know already. The rest are noise. I am the one who remains." Keller scribbled furiously, his pen shaking. This is the master," he whispered. Gabriel lifted the crucifix, his voice firm. "In Christ's name, identify yourself." Andreas did not flinch. His smile widened. "Names are for the weak. You give them to bind. I am not bound." The crucifix trembled in Gabriel's hand, not from his grip but from a pressure in the air that pressed down on everyone present. Keller swore under his breath, fighting the urge to flee. "Leave him," Gabriel commanded. "Depart from this child." Andreas leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking with Gabriel's. "I am not in him. He is in me." The words sliced through the chamber like a blade. Gabriel's throat went dry. Andreas continued, calm, almost conversational. "The others cling, yes, But I am not like them. I do not enter, I draw in. I make him part of me. When he weakens, I grow stronger. Do you understand, Father? There is no removing me. To cast me out is to tear the boy out with me. Keller's pen slipped from his fingers, hitting the floor with a sharp clatter. Gabriel's voice wavered, but did not break. You are a liar. Christ's power breaks every chain. Andreas tilted his head again, almost pitying. Then chain me. Watch what breaks first, your faith or his body. The room fell silent. Gabriel's prayers faltered for the first time in weeks. Keller stood frozen, staring at Andreas as if seeing him for the first time. And then Andreas collapsed back onto the cot, unconscious. The faint smile lingered even in sleep. Gabriel lowered the crucifix, his hands trembling. For the first time since the ordeal began, doubt gnawed at him. Not about the spirits, but about the possibility of winning. Outside, Mrs. Vogt's sobs seeped through the heavy church door. That night, Keller wrote in his notes, "If the Master speaks true, then every attempt to save Andreas may also destroy him. The question is no longer whether he survives the exorcism, but whether he can survive without it." The church bells struck midnight. The sound reverberated through the empty streets of Oberndorf. But inside St. Michael's no one moved. The air was too heavy, the shadows too deep. Father Gabriel knelt before the altar, whispering prayers in a voice hoarse with exhaustion. Beside him, Dr. Keller prepared his instruments, stethoscope, notes, a vial of water for emergencies. He no longer pretended this was a clinical case. His science had reached its end. Andreas lay on the cot, pale as linen, his chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm. His lips still curved faintly, as if a secret lingered there. Mrs. Vogt had been persuaded to remain outside the chamber again, though her muffled cries drifted through the door. Gabriel rose slowly, crucifix in hand. "Tonight, we face him directly," he said. His words carried no triumph, only grim resolve. The prayers began. Latin phrases rolled off Gabriel's tongue, steady but strained. Keller recorded, though his hand trembled. For long minutes Andreas lay motionless. Then his body convulsed violently, eyes snapping open. But unlike previous nights, there was no chaos, no chorus. Only one voice spoke, calm and measured, resonating deeper than bone. "You call me as if I were far, but I have always been here." Gabriel lifted the crucifix higher. "In the name of Christ I command you, reveal your true name and depart." Andreas's eyes glowed faintly in the candlelight, unblinking. His lips moved slowly, deliberately. "To you, I am nameless. To him." He pointed a shaking finger at his own chest. "I am Father." The word pierced the chamber like a curse. Keller felt his stomach lurch. He remembered Andreas's own father, long dead, a void in the boy's life. The entity had claimed the empty role. Gabriel pressed harder. "You are no father. You are deception. You have no place in this child." The voice answered softly, almost tenderly. "He is no child. He is mine. I keep him. I feed on what you call weakness. Every prayer you speak, I swallow. Every fear his mother sheds, I drink. You think I leave? I do not leave. I remain." The crucifix in Gabriel's hand felt suddenly heavy, as though resisting him. He forced himself to keep it raised, his voice growing desperate. "Spirit, I bind you. I command you to depart." Andreas's body stiffened. His back arched until it seemed his spine would snap. Then he fell limp, motionless. Keller rushed forward, checking his pulse, weak but present. He looked at Gabriel. If you continue, he could die. Gabriel's eyes burned. "If I stop, he belongs to it forever." He returned to prayer, louder now, voice raw. Keller covered his ears as Andreas screamed, not with 29 voices, not with fractured whispers, but with one clear cry, a sound so human it shredded every defense they had left. "Please," Andreas begged, his own voice breaking through, "don't let him take me." Gabriel nearly faltered. For an instant, he saw not the entity, not the spirits, but the boy, terrified, pleading. He pressed the crucifix to Andreas's forehead. The scream that followed was inhuman, ripping through the chamber. Candles guttered out, plunging the room into near darkness. Keller's notes slipped from his hand, scattering across the floor. When the light returned, Andreas lay utterly still. His chest rose, but barely. His eyes were closed. Gabriel fell to his knees, drenched in sweat, whispering prayers more like pleas than commands. Keller leaned close, listening for breath. After a long, agonizing pause, Andreas exhaled weakly. "He's alive," Keller said, though doubt cracked his voice. But then Andreas's lips moved, forming words so faint they barely existed. Gabriel leaned in, straining to hear. "They haven't gone." Silence followed. Heavy, absolute. Gabriel sat back, shaking, his crucifix slipping from his hand onto the floor. Keller closed his notebook, his face ashen. Neither man spoke again that night. When dawn broke, Andreas still breathed, but his eyes did not open. He remained in that state, neither free nor lost. The official church records would later mark the case as inconclusive. No declaration of success, no formal recognition of failure. The diocese discouraged further inquiry. In Oberndorf, the story faded into whispers. Some said Andreas eventually recovered, though withdrawn, marked forever. Others claimed he was sent away quietly to a monastery abroad, and some believed he never left the church at all. But those who were present, the priest, the doctor, the mother, carried the memory like a wound that never healed, because in their hearts, none of them could forget the final words Andreas spoke. "They haven't gone." And in the silence that followed, each of them had felt it, a presence still lingering, closer than breath.